Welcome back to Sports That Made Me. This time, we're taking a different approach and digging into the behind the scenes of the sporting industry, more particularly the world of journalism and commentary. I'm really excited to share this episode with everyone, and more importantly, I'm delighted to welcome Nick Mullins to the podcast. Well, Nick, thank you very much for joining us, and if there's anyone out there who doesn't quite know exactly what you do you reckon you could briefly explain that for us?
I don't know. What do I? Can you tell me what I do, Will?
Well,
my parents ask me that question all the time. What do you think? What should the answer be?
well, I would say, you have one of probably the most iconic voices in sports. You are TNT Sport's lead rugby commentator, having a background in journalism, BBC 5 Live, I believe, as well. And also, you commentate over some of the tennis, Wimbledon, as well.
I do. My mum and dad, I've been doing it for about 500 years, and still will my mum and dad say, what do you do during the week?
Oh, really?
Because we only ever hear you on Friday, Saturday and Sunday. But yeah, I mean, I hesitate to call it a job. It's not really a job, is it? Because all I do is turn up at sports events and shout out names and get excited. Or not if I'm watching England play rugby.
I think for most sports it's like that with England, isn't it, at the moment, really?
Yeah. But yeah, it's something I don't know. I always wanted to do this. I know part of what you're talking about on the pod is how you got into these things. Mum will tell you, if you talk to her, that I would always come back from playing football for my junior club or rugby for my junior club on Saturday, Sunday mornings and write up a match report, which is just about the saddest thing I've ever heard. I don't remember this, probably because it was all a bit too traumatic.
Yeah.
And I dreamt of actually having better things to do with my 12-year-old life than write up match reports of ridiculously bad games that I'd been involved in. But I did used to do that, and I'd play cricket against the back wall. Sounds like I grew up without any mates, which isn't entirely true.
I was going to say that can't be right.
No, but when I did, as I'm sure we all did, used to play football against the back wall or throw rugby balls against the wall and cricket balls, I would actually commentate in my head and sometimes out loud. And it's only really since I started to do the job seriously that I began to think about those things. It's probably not entirely healthy. I'm not suggesting you will go off and commentate on your own when you're playing tennis or whatever. But yeah, I think I was always destined to do this kind of thing. Love sport, love words, and this seems like I would love getting into sports events for free, which is
a big plus.
Yeah, there's got to be some perks to the job when the alarm's going off at 3:45 on a Dublin morning. After you've done a game, after you've done Ireland, Australia, as I did a couple of weeks ago, and you've got to get the 6:30 flight from Dublin to get to Manchester on a wet, cold English northwest day to do Sale against Leicester, then it doesn't seem to be that glamorous a job, to be honest. But largely speaking, there are bits of glamour here and there.
I was going to say probably going abroad and over the summer for World Cups. That's got to be a major highlight of it, really.
Yeah. I've been some places doing this job that I would never have been to previously. My first, in the early days, in the early 90s, I was the producer for BBC Radio's rugby coverage, looking after commentators like Ian Robertson, who was the radio rugby correspondent for a long time. And essentially, it was just my job to book flights, book hotels, book cars, book restaurants, make sure that the wires worked when we got to stadiums. Yeah. But you did have some fabulous trips. And my first big trip abroad was the Rugby World Cup in 1995, which was in South Africa. And South Africa, as you may know, at that time was a really interesting place in its history, because Nelson Mandela had just been released from jail. The Rainbow Nation, the beginnings of the Rainbow Nation were being talked about. The proper integration of the black community, the majority black community into South African life. And that Rugby World Cup was really one of the big generators to the outside world that proper change was happening within that country. And to be there then was astonishing. And to be at the World Cup final that year is still one of my greatest ever sporting memories. But yeah, wherever they play rugby, wherever there have been Olympic Games over the last 20 years. Bit of football here and there for Radio 5 and for BT not so long ago. But yeah, I've tended to have been there, and I wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for this job.
Well, I mean, it's definitely something I think everyone would really love to be able to do, is travel to all of these countries and have those experiences as well. Because obviously that, not just as a person in sports, that experiencing those different cultures obviously helps you so much as a person as well.
Yeah, I think also part of the job, when people say, what is the job of a commentator? And I kind of flippantly say it's just shouting out names so that you recognize them on the sofa. It's actually a little bit more than that in my mind. And I mean, it would be interesting to know what you think the job of a commentator is, and, you know, what everyone with us today thinks that job might be. But I always try to bring you to where I am. So if I am in South Africa covering a rugby match, then it's not enough just for me to shout out names or tell you what the score is. You need to know what the whole experience of a day's watching rugby in Johannesburg or Cape Town or wherever is. So I want you, when you're listening to us on the telly, to feel like you're actually sitting next to us in the stadium and that you've experienced the trip on the train to Kings Park or Ellis Park. You've stopped off for a braai in the car park. You've seen the trains rattling behind the stadium if you're in Durban. So I think part of the job of the commentator, it's almost like a travel presenter's job sometimes. If I'm in Dublin, as I will be for the Six Nations early next year, if I walk by a pub on the way to the ground, I'm talking about that pub on the way to the ground within the commentary, if it fits in, because you're all of a sudden with me in the stadium. You know what the walk to Lansdowne Road feels like if you've gone down Bagot Street and beyond O'Donoghue's and Downey and Nesbitt's. So I think that's one of the art. If commentary is an art, I think that's one of the facets of it, to do all you can to bring whoever's listening at home through that complicated box of wires and lights, the television, to bring them into the seat next to you. And there are so many different ways of doing that beyond getting excited about the particular sporting event that you're watching.
Yeah, because I was going to say as well, I think definitely commentary, you want it to come across as if, like, as you said, they're there next to you in the stadium, but without it being too overpowering, without it being too almost not annoying, but along those lines. You don't want to be too heavy.
Well, I think the big difference between radio commentary and television commentary, and you can probably work this out for yourself, the big difference is that on the television, you can sometimes have moments like this, and I'll introduce you to the moment now. And that's the moment. And that, what was that, 4 or 5 seconds? And it felt a little bit awkward. Even on a pod, because we're not used to, in these situations, having no noises whatsoever. Obviously, on a television commentary, if you're listening at home and I'm not talking for 5 seconds, you're hearing all those fabulous sounds of Twickenham or wherever in full voice. And if they're singing Fields of Athenry in Dublin, then I don't want to be talking over that. I want you to be able to hear that, because if you're sitting in the stadium in Dublin and they're singing all these wonderful songs, imagine you're sitting next to 3 of your mates, because that's what I'm doing as a commentator. Last time in Dublin, Ireland, Australia, I was sitting next to Ben Kay, former England World Cup winner, and Brian O'Driscoll, probably Ireland's greatest ever captain. And we're just behaving like 3 of you would if you were sitting in the stadium. We'll be talking, but we'll try not to talk too much, because if you're out with people who never stop talking, they can become annoying. We'll be listening for things that are interesting beyond the rugby, like the noises from the stands. And every now and again, we just need to I'm aware that we need to give your ears a rest at home, because increasingly on television, there are so many extra noises that we get to hear. And the referee is the obvious one. When I first started commentating, you never heard the referee. And you certainly now would never have heard the conversation between the referee and the touch judge, the assistant referee, let alone the TMO. um, in his truck. So we as commentators, I as a lead voice commentator, however you want to describe it, am in charge of protecting the listeners' ears, really, because you can see for yourself when you're watching television what you want to watch. But I can help work on your ears by not talking too much, by making sure that Ben and Brian don't talk too much over moments where actually silence is what you want to hear, or you want to hear the referee, or you want to hear the singing. So I think one of the keys to television commentary, maybe the most important thing, is knowing actually when to shut up. I've never had a complaint on X that says, "Dear TNT" or "Dear ITV, please tell your commentator Nick Mullins to speak more." I've never had anyone moan that I don't say enough, and I think it's one of the things that I would say. I'm rambling here a little bit, but it's one of the things that I would say to young commentators coming through. It's that as much as you feel like you have to speak for 80 minutes during a rugby match, or 90 minutes if it's football, you don't. Let the pictures, let the players, let the atmosphere carry some of the load for you as well. And if you listen to your favourite commentators, actually what they'll do is spend a fair proportion of the sports event not commentating, and just letting you make up your own mind, letting you watch it and listen. And I think that's a great skill. I've not mastered that, and I don't know whether I ever will. But to have that, to get that balance between coming up with the right words, but also knowing at the same time when you just need to shut up a little bit.
Because that was definitely, based off that, I do have a couple of questions. One of them was, you obviously mentioned it there, the importance of silence, kind of briefly on that. But why, as you said, why is that so important to let those moments kind of breathe?
Two reasons. If all the three of us did for 80 minutes was talk non-stop, it doesn't matter how interesting or insightful Ben or Brian, or on those very rare occasions I am. We just know as humans that our ears don't really respond well to 80 minutes of non-stop chatter. If you're on a train and somebody who you don't know is sitting opposite you and they're constantly talking, it winds you up. Your ears need a break every now and again to percolate what they've just heard, to think about what they've just heard, to allow you time to make up your own minds as well sometimes. And again, going back to that business of, if you are thinking of doing this, imagine sitting in the stadium with two of your mates. If you're doing that, you're not talking for the entire game as a three. You're watching the away end in a football match. You're listening to the chants. You're looking at what the referee's doing. You're having a breather, and that's life. That's it. It's a nice, gentle conversation, I hope, that has its rises and its falls as the match.
Flows.
Right, exactly. But you're not paid by the word, and remember that, and just allow. That pause allows two things. It allows the listener's ears to have a rest, and also it allows you to think of something that is worth saying.
Yeah.
Another facet of commentary is not to talk nonsense as much as you possibly can. And I defy anyone to tell you that they can talk for 80 minutes and form perfectly coherent sentences or things that you want to hear for a full 80 minutes, for a full hour and a half. I just don't think it's possible.
Yeah,
Give yourself time to think. Yeah, come up with the right words, come up with the right phrases. Don't overdo it. Get the tone right. There are so many things I'm thinking about during the game beyond who's on the ball and giving the referee time to talk when they're talking. Because again, actually one of the things that I'm sure winds up so many people is if the commentator is talking when the referee's talking. Yeah. Shut up. Yeah. Ben Kay always sits to my right, and Ben was a big, tough rugby player, but he comes back with more bruises on his left arm after working with me at the weekends than he ever did as a player, because I'm constantly whacking him when he's talking over the referee, and we all do it because we're excited. Ben's the best commentator I work with in the world, but sometimes he's not listening to the referee enough, and I do it, and Ben's hitting me as well. So for all of you who hate us talking over referees, I promise we hate it as much as well. It's just that we need to concentrate more. But yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
it's the silences in between the words that hopefully emphasize the words. It's like, if you look at a painting, it's the white on the painting that emphasizes the colors. And if all you're ever getting is non-stop chatter, it just starts to tire a little bit in the end.
Yeah. Oh, I do. I agree with that one. But I want to kind of switch back to the start now. So you obviously mentioned you played football. That's how you kind of got into commentary, by commentating over and writing the match reports. Did you ever
Yeah.
play anything else? Was there anything like rugby
Yeah,
related?
loads of
Or
sports. Yeah, growing up in a comprehensive school in Leicestershire in the when would it have been in the 1980s, you got introduced to loads of sports, thankfully. So our school played football. We had a Welsh PE teacher who loved rugby, Mr. Price. So we played rugby. Played for the school team, played for the school football team. Mr. Price would always. Should I do a Welsh accent? What do you think, Will?
I mean,
People are going to laugh if
I
I
mean,
do a Welsh accent.
since we're based in Cardiff, I think it's only
Uh,
right that that you
oh,
attempt it.
right. All right. Well, I'll try my Welsh accent, but we'd be playing rugby matches
It's
at school in Leicestershire.
non-judgmental zone. So
No
anything
non-judge.
goes.
I've already exactly. I've issued the warning that this will not be a great Welsh accent. But we'd be playing rugby, and a football would bounce onto the pitch from the next door football pitch, and I'll never ever forget Mr. Price bellowing, saying, "Get that funny shaped ball off our pitch." And that summed up rugby for me, really. It still strikes me that football is a sport that takes itself far too seriously, and rugby's a sport that doesn't. Rugby still remains essentially a sport for fun, despite the fact that we all know how hard it can be, particularly at the professional level. But if it was sport, then I played it. Rugby, football, loved tennis. Tennis was the sport I played most of during the summer, ahead of cricket. All of these sports to no great standard, but just love playing them. Badminton, whatever. I loved, and I think that's the essence of it. You can't be a commentator or a correspondent in whatever field it might be, and it wasn't always certain that I'd go into sport as a job in journalism. For a while, I just wanted to be a news journalist working on newspapers in London, covering general news stories, politics, court, crime, whatever. But if you're listening to a political correspondent now or an environmental correspondent on the telly or the radio, the one thing we all have in common as correspondents and commentators is that we absolutely love the subject that we're talking about. And I hope that comes through in our commentaries as well. I don't think you can fake it. You can fake it for a while. But I've been doing this, as I say, for about 500 years. And I think if I didn't love rugby, you would pretty quickly hear that through my voice, through what I'm saying. But it was that general introduction to all sports, Will, that my school gave me and that I fell in love with.
Do you think? Obviously, you mentioned there as well. You had you said rugby was more. It's kind of kept that more fun side to it. Do you think that's why you have more of an affiliation to the sport now, or is that not really something that's come into question, really?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm being brutally honest, why am I a rugby commentator and not a football commentator? It's purely because I love football just as much as I love rugby. Me and my dad are season ticket holders at Leicester City, and my weekend was made perfect by our two late goals against Brighton on Sunday. You're a Brighton fan, aren't you?
No, Reading.
Reading.
Yeah, we've just the manager's just gone to Hull, but we had a good draw against Wickham, so that was all right. We're still sixth, so it's
you're in Brighton's shadow though, aren't you? Does it hurt when I mention Brighton? Are you kind of rivals?
No, not really. It's more Oxford. Really, they got promoted. Yeah, they got promoted last season, so they're now for the first time in however many years it is in a division above us. But
Although, yeah, it hurts. It
Yeah.
hurts, doesn't it? I'm sorry. I was going to apologise for our two late goals at the King Power, but I don't, because I for half a second I'd mixed up Brighton with Reading. So apologies for that.
Similar colours.
Yeah, similar
Yeah,
colours.
we'll go with that.
Yeah, that's slightly better than you at the moment. In fact, they were a lot better than us at the weekend. But
Yeah,
that's the beauty of sport, isn't it? You
yeah.
you sometimes get what you don't deserve, and I'm not sure we deserve a draw on Sunday. Anyway, this is not what we're here to talk about.
No.
But yeah, there was a point in the late '90s when I was on Five Live doing radio commentary. And I was doing football commentary. I was commentating on opening ceremonies at Olympic Games. I was doing rowing commentary, boat race commentary, bit of rugby commentary. When I could have headed into lots of different directions. And I guess if an opportunity had arisen in the football commentary team, then I may well have been a full-time television football commentator these days. I did a couple of years worth of radio football commentary, doing Liverpool, Everton, Merseyside derbies, going to European games. So, doing all the stuff that you listen to on Five Live. I was doing that back in the day. But the door opened in rugby. There's a guy called Bill McLaren, who some of you may have heard of, just the greatest television rugby commentator there's ever been. He was commentating for 50 years on the
Why,
BBC.
if I could just, why do you think he was the best? Or
Um, well, I tell you what Bill did was what I think we all aspire to do, and what I've tried to do, which is to make you feel comfortable listening to him, and to make you want to listen to him, and for you to feel that you're in the company of a friend, somebody that you trust, somebody whose voice you like, somebody who doesn't overtalk, as Bill didn't, somebody who was clever with words, came up with interesting ways of describing things on a rugby pitch that you see happen 25 times a game. He had I think perhaps as importantly as anything, he had an affinity with the players and the coaches. He was always trying to be positive, which is something I've tried to do. It's too easy to be negative and to criticize players for making mistakes. We all know they don't try to make mistakes. These are world-class athletes at the absolute top of their game. They deserve the respect that we give them. So I think it was Bill's warmth and his use of words. Will, have you heard much of what Bill did? Have you heard much of Bill's commentary?
no, I can't say I have.
No, I mean, have a listen to him on YouTube. He's just got that right pitch. When
Yeah,
the teams run out at the start of a big international Calcutta Cup match, Bill's voice cuts through the sound, and that's also what you need to have as a commentator. Clearly, you've got to have a voice that allows you to cut through 80,000 people going mad, and not to annoy those sitting at home watching on their sofas for 80 minutes, to drive them to distraction. But Bill had it all. He just loved the sport, and yeah, was synonymous with it. So when Bill retired in the early 2000s, and BBC Television came to me, because I've been doing some radio commentary, came to me and said, "How do you?" And there's another guy called Eddie Butler, who you will know certainly if you were growing up in Cardiff. Eddie and I were the two that the BBC Television wanted to bring in to replace Bill McLaren and Nigel Starmer-Smith, who was the English voice commentator. Starmer's another top bloke. So it was a sliding doors moment, really. Could have been football. We could have been talking about football today, but we're not, because Bill McLaren, Nigel Starmer-Smith both retired at the same time. BBC needed some television rugby commentators, and Eddie and I were the two that they plumped for. And so many of you, I suspect, I don't want to sound like your aging grandparents here, but so many of you at the start of your careers will hopefully have brilliant ideas of what you want to do, what you want to be, how you want to spend your careers. But often you will be heading in the right direction, but another door will unexpectedly open that you will think, oh yeah, okay, I'll do this rather than commentate on football, and you'll find yourself having a very lovely life going to rugby matches as opposed to football ones. So as much as it's great to have your ambitions and to have an idea of where you want to go, always be flexible, always have your ears and eyes open for other opportunities that you might not necessarily have considered previously.
So if we move on from you getting in, being approached for that gap in the rugby commentary, did you have any sort of setbacks going in and taking that job, or was it all just kind of plain
Oh yeah.
sailing?
Oh no, 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 no. One of the first game I ever did live was Wales against Argentina, I think it was, an autumn international at the I think it might have been the old Cardiff Arms Park, the National Stadium before the Principality Stadium, the new one had even been built, which is an idea of how long ago it was. And I described brilliantly this Wales try that was running from 50 metres until I realised that the bloke running in from 50 metres was not the bloke that I was talking about. And misidentifying players.
Recording in progress.
You still do. You misidentifying players is one of those things. It's part of the job. But to do it in my first ever match, I don't think I slept much that night. And yeah, it still happens. I think one of the keys, I guess it's like any job, and particularly in sport, you can't dwell on it. You can't spend the next 60 minutes thinking, oh my God, I've just called the bloke by the wrong name, because it just then impacts on the rest of the commentary. You will make mistakes. I continue to make mistakes, hopefully as few as possible, but you've got to back those times when you don't make mistakes to hopefully make up for the moments when you do.
And then in terms of those mistakes, how do you kind of deal with them? Is it just sort of just move on, pretend it doesn't happen, or is there more of like a critical analysis of yourself that you go through to be like, I'm not going to do that again? Or
yeah,
really,
I suppose
to a certain extent, can you not prevent mistakes from happening? Which I guess can you?
Yeah, it's live sport, isn't it? And I think what you do, there are several. It's a really great question, Will, and there are several things that happen. One is the immediate aftermath of the mistake, and you've got to decide as the commentator or the presenter or the reporter whether it's the kind of mistake that everybody will have noticed, and therefore you've got to say, listen, what an absolute banana I am. Clearly, that was a try scored by X, Y, or Z. So if it's huge, then I think the best approach is to say, yeah, it was actually scored by. You don't have to hang yourself, but it was actually scored by. There are the smaller errors where in the middle of a try or on the way to a line out, you will misidentify one of the players in a move that involves you using 6 names. I tend not to worry too much about that. So they're the A's and B's of the live in-game reaction. And then post-match, like I guess players will, you ask yourself why you made that mistake. What was it about that moment? Did you take a chance? If it was a try from a line out and a rolling line out and a maul, and you can't see the ball carrier and you're assuming it's the hooker, and actually right at the end the hooker's transferred the ball to the loose head prop, but you didn't see that because there are 6 other bodies around them. Yeah. You can happily say, well, I took a risk there and I knew I shouldn't, and the next time that happens I won't take the risk. I will absolutely need to be sure before I name the try scorer. And what you can do, and I do it all the time, I'll work as hard as I possibly can to identify those players before the game. So if something like that does happen from 75 metres, I don't necessarily have to see the number 2 on the back of the hooker's shirt to know it's the hooker. I'll be looking at hairstyles during the warm-up. I'll be out there with my binoculars, writing down boot colours on my commentary sheet. So every little clue that I can get, where they strap, how they strap their legs, have they got strapping on their wrists? Do they tape their fingers if they're the scrum half? So anything that will help identify player X from player Y in a situation where I need some help because I can't see their face and I can't see the number. So you just work hard. I mean, if I make mistakes, and I make mistakes every weekend, but every time I make a mistake, it's actually not a bad thing, I find, because it just underlines that however hard you work not to make mistakes, you will make them. Just don't be discouraged by them. Don't make them too often, and don't make the same ones consecutively. Work out why you made them, deal with it, move on, try not to lose your confidence.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I've kind of found doing the commentary for some of the Cardiff Met teams here. It was
Mm.
like the first one I did. It was very like, although yeah, you want to go and see the players, which I did, and but getting used to them, they all had. So they obviously there's Cardiff Met FC, which play in the Welsh Premier League, and then a lot of the teams play in the Bucks. A lot of players play in the Bucks team, which is like the uni versus uni sort
Yep.
of sport on a Wednesday, and they use the same kit. But a lot of the players playing in Bucks were using the shirts from the Met first team, so they all had different names on the back. So in my first commentary I did, I associated them, been down to see them in training just to kind of get used to their faces. And then all of a sudden they were all wearing different names, and I was trying to read it off there, and I was like, actually these are all the wrong players. But then, as you said, like associating like boots and hair, like now I've done it 3, 4, 5 times. I don't need to see what numbers they are. I can just see who it is, and I think that's definitely
Exactly.
a really important thing. And you mentioned not getting too down about yourself. Like in the first one that I did, I was like, wow, I've just called like 7 players the wrong person. But it's like, well, I can't really do anything about that now. I just can call them right next time. So
Exactly, exactly. And you can also be guaranteed that if you're doing it in the Six Nations, you'll have plenty of people on Twitter
yeah,
or X helpfully pointing out that wasn't that wasn't who you thought it
yeah,
was. It's all part of the fun, Will.
yeah. And I guess that's the blessing of doing it in uni sport first.
Well, yeah, and I did a local radio.
Yeah,
And what I would say is there are lots of young commentators coming into the game who want it all now. And I would advise against wanting it all now because, make sure you're absolutely ready before you take the next step up
yeah,
because it takes a long time to develop a reputation that Bill McLaren had of somebody that is trustworthy to the audience, and it takes 5 seconds to lose it. But also, if you're not building that confidence in what you're about in the first place, and you're creating barriers immediately between yourself and the viewer in terms of trust. It's very difficult to get over those barriers once they're in place. So make sure you are the absolute best you can be before you take that next step up. I see so many people around at the moment who think that if they've been doing it for 2 years, they're as good as they're going to be,
yeah.
and they can therefore, you know, go and do some stuff on television. Well, great, you might be able to, but when it starts to go wrong, you've got no safety net.
Yeah, and I was going to say as well, doing like the live part of it as well with our broadcasting, with the live streams we do, doing it live compared to doing it for highlights or for a match report or something like that, it's a completely different ball game. The pressure's obviously so much higher as well because it is live, and
Yeah.
and it's like that. You can't just edit it out. It's there
No,
for everyone to hear.
no. Yeah, in a funny way though, I don't know how you feel about it. I find it much easier to do it live than do highlights because
Yeah,
highlight, you don't have that. You've not got that. You have to get it right. Pressure.
yeah,
So I think live is always so much easier
yeah. It's
than trying to put it on afterwards.
it's
I tell you
it's
the
more of
other
a
thing that
thrill
I'm
as
sure
well.
you're yeah, the other thing that you're thinking about, and it's the thing that comes with experience and doing it for long enough is, and I'm sure you're thinking about this now, but what is your voice? Who is Will Richards? What does he sound like? Make sure that the Will Richards that we chat to in the bar at uni is the same Will Richards that you listen to on
Yeah,
TV. Don't create two personalities. And that might seem ridiculously obvious, but we all know if we're doing broadcasting, it's a very unnatural thing sometimes.
yeah,
And the key is to make something that is a little bit unnatural seem natural. So hopefully, should you ever bump into me at a ground, and it's happened a couple of times actually, on the street in Dublin before Ireland, Australia, a couple of weeks ago. And then actually, funnily enough, at the football at Leicester Brighton on Sunday, I was just walking in with my dad and chatting with my dad, chewing his ear off about something. And there was a guy in front of us who turned around and said, "Oh my God, you coming to the football today, Nick?" And it was only the voice that he recognised. And he said, "You sound just like you do on the telly." And I think, well, yeah,
yeah. That's what
because
you
that's
you're taught
that's
from
what I
that.
sound
Yeah,
like. And that's actually the greatest thing. That's the nicest thing anyone can say about you, really. That who I am, who you are, Will, is what people hear on TV. And if you're heading in that direction, then I think you're doing all right.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me quite nicely onto the next point, which was about finding your voice. How did you come up with your style, or was it just simply this is how I am, or was there some elements of it that maybe you had to maybe overpronounce or maybe lift your voice, work to lift your voice for certain moments, or was it all just kind of quite natural?
I honestly haven't worked particularly hard at being who I am. I've worked really hard at trying to be myself. Um, the only restrictions I put on were in the very early days when I was taking over from Bill McLaren, and he developed this persona as somebody who he described Doddy Weir as a charging giraffe, and you'd have heard all these Bill McLaren phrases like a baggy up aboard a burn. And I said to myself, I didn't set myself a target of doing it for the first 5 years or of not doing it, but I said, don't try to do it the way Bill
Yeah,
did it
not try
early
and
on,
replicate
because
it.
all you'll be accused of is trying to be some kind of poor man's Bill McLaren, which is not what I wanted to be. And Bill was brilliant in the way that he encouraged all of us coming through. Bill always would say, don't fail trying to be me, which is just, the best advice, whatever you're doing. Make sure that you succeed being you, because that's the easiest thing to be. You can't go through your life I couldn't go through my broadcasting career trying to be Bill McLaren. That would have just been exhausting and ridiculous in equal measure. So I've actually not, I have to work really hard at understanding the laws, keeping on top of law changes, identifying players, going to training sessions, making sure that I'm pronouncing the Fijian names properly in the way that they would pronounce them. But I genuinely, and perhaps I've forgotten if I did go through a process of finding my own voice, genuinely, I commentate. I suppose I commentate for me. And that's all you can do,
Yeah,
Will. You can only commentate for you. And if you see humor in something, don't be afraid to talk about that. If a ridiculous phrase comes into your mind, don't be. Sale had a hooker, a little South African hooker called Aka van der Merwe, and he'd charge around he'd been charging up overnight, and I just thought it's like a little motorized warthog, that bloke, and it's a
yeah,
nonsense phrase, a motorized warthog. What on earth does that mean? But it came into my mind as I saw him running around, and I used it. And the response from the viewer was, oh my God, it just made me laugh so much. It's perfect for him. So if you see something, so again, it's just going back to being yourself.
yeah.
I don't write these things down. I think you can tell commentators who write down
Scripting.
script. You can't script sport. The best commentaries, you can script the first 20
Yeah,
seconds
it's in like the
going into the
intros
team sheet.
and
Exactly.
yeah,
You can think about, you're not doing your job if you're not thinking about how you get into the match or writing 20 seconds around the team news over that graphic. But the minute the game kicks off, I will have notes that pertain to what players have done, what teams have done to keep the game journalistically credible. But I'm not scripting words for Freddie Burns dropping a goal in the 80th minute of
yeah,
a Premiership final against Saracens for Leicester, because it would be ridiculous. The best
yeah.
commentaries are those that come from the heart, that come from the pit of the stomach. Allow yourself to be surprised, to be amazed, because that's what
Yeah.
sport's about.
So how important is it then to almost live in the moment, was as a
Oh,
commentator,
oh,
watching
totally.
sport, living in the moment?
Totally, and again, it's another. I think it's starting to come into sport. We are, I would argue, overusing numbers and statistics far too much. I'm not big on statistics because for every single player, we have columns of dozens and dozens of numbers that I can throw in at you for a full 80 minutes and not talk once about actually what we're seeing on the pitch. And I think statistics have become the refuge of those who don't look for the humanity in a player, how they might be feeling, what they look like. Talk about them in a way that their mum and dad would enjoy you talking about them. If Caelan Doris has made 35 tackles on the opening weekend of the Six Nations when they play England in Dublin, I would hope I'd mention that, because clearly those 35 tackles have had a major impact on who's winning that match. But if he's made six tackles and hit three rucks, that's not significant. So don't be blinded by numbers. And I think I'm hearing that coming in with young commentators more and more. Maybe because you're growing up with that bank of
Yeah, I
statistics
was
that
going
you
to say
think
there seems to be new stats for almost every single thing possible coming out, and
yeah. I mean, even the word stats I have an aversion to because
yeah,
it's almost as if I've got a stat for you. Well, great. Is it interesting? Does it add to what I'm seeing? Does it help explain what I'm seeing? If it doesn't, shut up. Just either say something more relevant, or if it's television, say nothing at all. Going back to, the earlier part of the conversation. I think the other challenge as well, Will, that how things have changed since Bill McLaren's day.
hmm
More and more commentators commentate for the social media clip. They
yeah,
commentate that 20 seconds online after the match. And I think that's impacting adversely on on what else you listen to during the commentary, because I know that not everything is the greatest thing since the dawn of time,
hmm
or not everything is nuclear Armageddon, or not everything is the most amazing bit of rugby you have ever seen and will ever see in the rest of your life. There's if it's another thing about building people's trust in you. When you feel the need to get excited, when somebody wins a World Cup final, get excited. If it's something a little bit further down the list, just keep it a little bit more natural, I think. But yeah, that would be another observation of mine.
yeah. So kind of just saying the right thing at the right time without saying too much, basically, is what we're
Yeah.
going for, and kind of really the main question you mentioned there. The commentators looking for that kind of viral 20-second clip. Do you think, obviously with social media now coming in, it's quite well, it's arguably the biggest sort of platforms for people to find sport on. But do you think, kind of a two-part question, do you think time is changing with that? And how important do you think it is? And for you personally, do you think your style of commentary has changed over the years from when you started to now?
I think there's a pressure on all of us who've been doing it for a while to turn in that social media clip. I mean, I know when I come off air, having done a game for TNT or ITV, the bits that they'll be throwing out on social media are the 20-second try scoring moment. So you're aware of that in the back of your mind. They're not throwing out the lovely conversation I might have had with Ben Kay or Brian O'Driscoll about somebody's unusual boot colours.
Yeah,
But you can't forget that, and I'm not saying one is more important than the other, but I'm saying you've got to create that light and shade. Not everything has to be in sixth gear. Not everything has to be, the crack at the dawn of time. It can just be a try.
yeah,
And because you're not talking to idiots, you're talking to people who understand the game as well, if not better than you do. And if you're constantly telling somebody that is a try to match Gareth Edwards in the bar against New Zealand for the Barbarians all those years ago,
yeah.
they're going, no, it's not. That's ridiculous, Nick. Why are you telling us that?
Mm.
We can see for ourselves. What you need to be doing is reflecting the general reaction of those at home. So if it really is the greatest try since the dawn of time, make sure you say that. But if it isn't, don't worry about what the producer might be putting out on X. You're helping their career, but it's about your career in the long
Yeah.
term. And I think if you commentate in bursts for X, your career won't last long,
hmm
and you'll very quickly alienate those who want to listen to somebody
Yeah.
who they quite like to be sitting next to in the stands. And I just think we're trying to be too clever sometimes at
Yeah.
the moment.
So, like, obviously,
Do you agree, by the way? Do you,
yeah, yeah.
because you're
I
kind of,
was,
the next generation. I wonder how you feel about that.
yeah. I mean, I definitely think, obviously, over watching the whole broadcast, you want it to be entertaining, you want it to be insightful. But if it's not, and then it's all of a sudden raised by 100 decibels, and then goes back down to not, it's not very stimulating for the whole thing. You want to be stimulated during it.
Yeah.
And that kind of, what you said there, ironically moves on to the next question. I was going to say, with commentary, it's there to kind of provide extra information and to the live broadcast. But do you think commentary can end up ruining that live picture of sport.
Yeah, I think so. And we all know
And
why. Why? Because you're not reflecting what you're seeing, because you're over talking. All of the things that we've talked about really
Yeah.
well. People's voices. There are some commentators who come onto the scene who, just don't have a voice that's pleasant to listen to. And
Is that something, if you're looking to get into commentary, no matter how good you could be at it, if you don't have a nice listening voice, that's going to hold you back? Or is that something, do you think, can adapt?
Well, that wouldn't be my decision, because obviously I'm not in the business of employing commentators. But in answer to that question, I would say, if you're the viewer, how do you feel about it?
Yeah.
Do you enjoy? When you think of your favorite commentators or commentators that you enjoy listening to, if you'd like to be a commentator, which commentators do you try to take after? Do many of those commentators have poor voices that grate? I'd be surprised if they did.
Yeah.
I'd also be surprised if there are many on the telly, to be honest, who've got that far without a reasonable voice. It's a bit like a singer or a musician.
Yeah.
You're not going to be number one if you can't play your guitar.
Yeah, and I was going to say, there's no auto-tune doing live commentary,
No, exactly. So I think, yeah, I would hope that the answer to that question is pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Oh well, I 100%.
Which is a shame. Yeah, which is a shame, because there will be people who can commentate brilliantly and use fabulous words and protect the silences and do all the things that Bill McLaren used to do, but have a voice that just strips paint. It doesn't do something else right. Use your skills in another area, that go and do online stuff. But I think long term, if your voice doesn't work, then you're not going to have a lengthy career in broadcasting.
Yeah, and then as we kind of come towards the end, we've still got a bit of a while, but I wanted to talk about the differences between tennis and rugby as well. As a commentator, how do they differ? Obviously, it's quite clear in the two sports, but with tennis, it doesn't seem to be too much commentary compared to rugby. Kind of when the rally starts going, it seems obviously there's a silence, and then it's kind of like a reactionary bit after. I could be on completely the wrong lines, but I kind of wanted to know the differences between the two, and which one do you find harder to commentate over?
Well, the differences between tennis and any other live sport like rugby, football, and I'll mention NFL from an American perspective, depends to a certain degree on where you're watching the broadcast. Because if you listen to tennis commentary on American television, they're commentating throughout. If you listen to it on ESPN or the Tennis Channel,
does that differ with different broadcasters? Do they expect a different style, or is that?
I've only ever worked for British tennis broadcasters, and the rule with British broadcasters is that you don't talk when the ball's in play, which adds its own challenges as a commentator, because it does mean that when you at the end of that point, you can either say nothing, which is very often my preferred approach, or if it's a fabulous shot, you react by with a it could be something as simple as can you believe that? All those little trite phrases that we all come. I'm no great shakes as a tennis commentator. I get brought in alongside the experts a couple of times a year to fill gaps. But I think, the art of not over talking in tennis and knowing how you are going to fill those gaps at the changeover with interesting conversation is clearly a different challenge to rugby. But I enjoy that.
Do you have to keep it more, not necessarily monotone, but more maybe dialed back a little bit with tennis compared to rugby, or do you not find that?
Yeah, you do. Because you react to the noises around you. Even Wimbledon centre court holds doesn't hold much more than 20,000. So
Mhm.
the sound level that you're working against in your headphone is different to even 24,000 at Welford Road. There is more of a crackle in your ears during a rugby or football match than there would normally be during a tennis match. But you react. Those inside centre court know a fabulous rally when they see it, and you therefore, when you start to talk, react to the level that centre court is
Yeah.
giving you. But equally, and I'm really hot on this. If you've just seen the greatest rally ever and centre court's going mad, as a television commentator, one of the decisions you've got to make in the spur of the moment, in the heat of the moment, is, do I need to say anything?
Mm.
Um, and very often, and I'm trying to get back to this within my game or full-time game rugby, I'm trying to get back to that moment where actually, if I've set the try up and I've mentioned the try scorer and the Aviva Stadium or the Principality's going mad, don't say anything. Just let the audience enjoy that noise of the stadium
Yeah.
celebrating.
And I was going to say that natural noise that the audience may bring, that goes back to your original point of trying to make that viewer at home in their living room feel like they're actually sat next to you in the stadium, so to say.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I remember my first boss on BBC Radio said, and this is in relation to commentating on football on the radio, but he said, "Don't be afraid," and this is this is kind of becoming the "Don't be afraid to leave silences"
Hmm.
podcast with Will and Nick. But he said, "Don't be afraid to leave silences." If Manchester United, well, let's go for Reading. Reading
Yeah.
have just scored the goal of the
Oh,
season at the
not
Medeski.
many fans at the
Imagine,
moment.
well, I know, but it's a big match. I don't know
Yeah.
what you find yourself in the quarterfinal of the FA Cup at home at the Medeski, and you just scored the winning goal in the 90th minute against Manchester City. The point Bob Shannon was making on Radio 5 was, don't ruin that moment with ridiculous words, because unless what you're about to say is more arresting, more illuminating, more exciting than what does the Medeski hold? 30,000?
24,
Whatever. Yeah.
24,
So
25,
24,
something like
25.
that. Yeah.
Unless what you're about to say is better than the noise of 25,000 people just celebrating the greatest moment of their week so far, again, shut up.
Yeah.
Because we all love sport. We all understand that moment. We all understand that that's the moment of the weekend, of the month for so many people.
Hmm.
So don't ruin it with inanities, with superfluous words that don't really mean anything. You're going to have a load of time off the bat when once the crowd do start to subside, to come in. But if you've set it up properly, if you've mentioned the name of the guy or the woman who scored the goal in the build up to that goal going in, the noise of celebration around you is the best noise in the
Yeah.
world at that moment. So don't spoil it by trying to add something yourself.
Would you say that's the best bit of advice you've been given, to use the silence,
Yeah,
or is there maybe
yeah.
something else
Protect.
that
Well,
comes to mind?
no, I think protecting. Well, yeah, respect the players. Celebrate what the players are trying to do. Don't never take yourself too seriously. Never try to be too clever, because there's always someone cleverer than you sitting next to you
Yeah.
who has won 133 caps playing for Ireland
Do you find
and
that,
captain the country.
sorry to cut you off, do you find that
So,
difficult when you're sat next to players who have reached the very pinnacle of the sport? Do you find it difficult to kind of, well, not necessarily compare yourself to them, but to feel like what I'm bringing is as important as what they've brought to the commentary?
oh yeah, I mean when I was playing on the right wing for Longslade High School in Leicestershire, I was achieving the kind of feats that Brian O'Driscoll and Ben Kay were achieving on a weekly basis. No, Will, I don't. I'm constantly thinking, what on earth am I doing here? Why are people having to put up with listening to me when they could be listening to Brian O'Driscoll and
Yeah.
Ben Kay and Sam Warburton? So no, God, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you think what you've got to say is more interesting than what Brian O'Driscoll or Sam Warburton might have to say, I would suggest you go and take a long, hard look at yourself in the mirror. It's your job to create the space to allow them to be brilliant. Again, I think one of the things you have to learn as a commentator is that it's the understated bits of your job. When I see people saying, wasn't David Flatman great on England against Ireland, or how good is Sam Warburton in Cardiff at the moment? I like to think both of those are good because I'm giving them the time to be good. So that's the only inward satisfaction I might take.
Yeah. Because
I know whose voice you would rather hear. So I'm giving those two time to do what they want to do. So never, ever, ever think that what you have to say is important or groundbreaking. You're just there to be good company and to make sure that those who do know that much more than you, I'm not saying, deliberately go out of your way not to learn about the sport, because I can ask questions that sometimes I know the answer to, but I think my mum listening at home might not, and it would illuminate what she's just seen if I ask Ben Kerr a question about why something in a line-out just happened. So this isn't an excuse for us as the main commentator to go into it stupidly. Know your sport, know your stuff, know the players, but know where you fit into the grand scheme of things. No one is tuning in to listen to Nick Mullins commentate on a game of rugby this weekend.
And it's that the kind of advice, as we get into the last 5 minutes or so, the one bit of advice you'd give to someone like me, for example, just what you've said there, just know when to talk, know when to let someone else talk, and know people aren't really here to listen to you, or would it be slightly different?
No, and the way I still think about it is if I'm commentating, I'll be commentating on Ireland, England, opening weekend of the Six Nations for ITV, first day in February. And as much as I'll be sitting in our fabulous commentary seats at the Aviva Stadium in Dublin, part of me will also be sitting back at home here in London on the sofa watching it on the telly. It's slightly different in a pub, because I know that in a pub you can't hear the commentary because there's so much else going on. But I'm putting myself in the position of the viewer at home all the time. Have we explained what we've just seen? Are we talking too much? Are we talking over the referee? Constantly ask you're the sound editor. A commentator is the sound editor, and the preserver of those spaces, which we've banged on interminably for the last hour. So make sure that you are the listener's eyes and ears. And if you think you've talked too much, and I'll give you a little example. Ireland kicked the ball from a penalty for the line out. And I think we've talked a lot over the last 2 or 3 minutes because the ball's been in play. And there's nothing really to explain. We're 30 minutes into the match. The line out has developed a rhythm and a routine of its own. People know who the players are by now because I've done the introductions. Ben's explained what's been going on over the last half an hour. I'll very often look to Ben, particularly if it's an attacking line out, and there'll be great noise of expectation around Dublin as Dan Sheehan picks the ball and walks towards the Ireland line out. There'll be a swell of noise that we all know and understand. And I'll just put my hand on Ben's microphone and say, just let this breathe a little bit. And that's because I know that if I was at home, that's what I'd want to hear, rather than anything technical about, where the number 1 or 2 jumpers might be at that point, or where the backs might be lining up. There are times during the match where, your words will elevate what you see. And you think of the great moments in sport, the great commentators have provided the soundtrack, in that cliched phrase, the great moments. Barry Davis, in my mind as a football commentator, did that on a weekly basis. But the great commentators also know how important it is for them to shut up every now and again. And it's your job as the number 1 commentator to be constantly editing what you would be listening to at home if you were listening at home. So always think about what you would like to be hearing at home. And you're the only one who can actually make sure that happens.
Yeah, I think that's a great bit of kind of advice and kind of like a lesson as well. I think we are...
Does that make sense?
It does.
Does that make sense to you?
It makes a lot of sense to me, and I think for everyone listening that will be well, I think that makes sense as well. There is just kind of one last question. I think we just have enough time for it. I want to know
Yep.
what your kind of standout moment in your commentary career, if you could call maybe one or two moments that you would say, those are my two best pieces of commentary.
Yeah.
Or one or two.
I think you've got to have moments that bits of commentary that match the moment. So from the Premiership, Tom Wood scored a try in a semi-final for Northampton against Leicester in the last minute to win it on a Friday night at Franklin's Gardens and to win a place in the final. And I think I got the words right that day, got the tone right, got the intonation right, the excitement levels. And Northampton fans, this was however many years ago, Northampton fans still come up to me and talk to me about those words over that try. And that's a bit of commentary where, hopefully the words that I use that day help people remember that moment and people quote it back to me. Freddie Burns' drop goal for Leicester against Saracens at Twickenham, same situation, last minute moment to win the final. So they're the kind of match winning moments, but equally in my mind they won't necessarily. Oh, actually no, there was one. Lewis Rees-Zammit scored a try for Gloucester once, and there's an NFL commentator that some of you might have heard of called Tony Romo. And what makes Tony Romo great? He's second voice really, but he works really hard to try to predict what might happen. And I'd been listening to Tony the weekend before, so I was looking out for moments within the game to signpost to say, you need to look now at Lewis Rees-Zammit. Look how he's skirting across the back of this scrum. And you'd hope that Harlequin's defence are doing likewise, because if they don't, they're going to be cut open. Gloucester got the ball to Lewis Rees-Zammit and he scored a try. Yeah. So that's, it wasn't the greatest piece of commentary, but in my mind as to what that job is, which is to signpost, to flag up things that, to point out where you or I might need to be at any one moment, that worked. And it was a bit nerdy, and it won't make any great commentary
more of a personal,
these days. It was more of a personal thing.
Kind of predicted what was going to happen and
predicted what would happen. And then any number of moments where I feel that I've struck a nerve in terms of tapping into what people in the stadium are thinking and what people at home might be thinking. You've got if the commentator formulates the words that are in your head as something happens at home, I think that's what resonates. I think the best commentators put on screen what we're all thinking. Mm-hmm. And they'll be either moments of joy or moments of despair, or they'll just be conversations. Again, going back to the 20-second social media clip, they don't always have to be cataclysmic moments or moments of great revelation. They can just be conversations that all of a sudden you're sitting at home thinking, oh yeah, I'd like to be part of this conversation. Mm-hmm. And that works equally well. So just be good company, come up with the right words when you can. And when you can't come up with the right words, shut up.
I think that's a great answer, great way to end the podcast on. I want to thank Nick for coming on. That's been episode 3. That's all we have time for today. And be sure to listen in to any future episodes that may come out.